So it'll notify you.
Cool.
Thank you.
I'll start us off. I'd like to introduce an incredibly important friend to me. He, I think, was probably my first lifelong friend that I met at Maryland Institute College of Arts. So this is back in 2000, and I think Colin and I connected during orientation. And I remember seeing him across on, you can imagine the quad or any college-like quad with the dorms surrounding you on all sides. And here comes this gangly, elongated guy with imagine like an Indiana Jones hat that's a little floppier. And he sits down next to me and just immediately is cordial, but he didn't just sit down on the lawn. He took his hat off and used his hat as a chair or a cushion of some sort. And this just became a reoccurring Colin thing that he did. Wherever he was going, he always sat on his hat. I always thought that was very strange. But talking to Colin, I remember a few things right off the bat. Is his dad is already an artist, and he was probably the best artist in his school. And I remember thinking to myself, here is this very talented guy, super nice guy, and his dad's an artist and he's incredible. And here I am, and none of my parents are like artists at all. They were, in hotel restaurant stuff. And I kept thinking, oh my gosh, I am in for a wild ride, because here's this pedigree of an artist here. And I am, small fish in a very big sea at school. But I just remember really enjoying being at almost every class, freshman, probably all the way through every pain class. I think Colin and I found a way to be together, whether it be Mark Carnes or Efra Rubenstein. And I just remember always being in awe of his work. And I am so grateful that he is here today to speak to us about sketchbooks and how that relates to almost life practice in a way, and what that means to him as a person. So Colin, it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the chance to talk to folks today.
Thank you.
So I think we kind of briefly talked about some ideas to think about in terms of your work. Did you want to kind of start us off with some of so people have an idea of what we're looking at or what we're talking about? Or maybe kind of a little bit about your background.
Yeah, and can you folks hear me okay? I've got the microphone sitting on the desk. Probably hearing my children in the other room and are upset that I'm not in the room with them. So you're going to hear some door knocking at points. And children will be a theme in this, actually, as I talk about sort of the process for this. I'm glad you mentioned my father, and thank you for everything you said, Jordan. And thank you for inviting me to do this, you and Mariana. I'm so excited to be here. I think this is such a fantastic series idea, and what you folks are doing with the Art Clinic Online and all the workshops you're doing. I appreciate you mentioning my father too. My father, Campbell, is in the audience here, as you folks have seen. I do owe him a great deal. The thing I want to get this said first. A lot of what you'll see today, actually, I give him a lot of credit for. His sketchbooks and his writing are absolutely beautiful. There are a lot of what in my DNA for this, both in terms of who I am and the practice I take to it. The thing that he always did that I so value in my upbringing as an artist is he never directed me. And I think that's why I landed in a place that does a lot of work that's similar to his. He never forced it on me. He just gave me a lot of supplies. He gave me access to his space and charcoal. He's got pictures of me drawing as a 4-year-old on the floor of his studio when I was very young. And I think just having a parent who was that receptive to that and didn't get upset about that and embraced it made me who I am in many, many ways. So I just want to acknowledge that and say thank you. And yeah, so I'm actually, my professional career right now is I'm a video game developer. So I'm the lead content designer at ZeniMax Online Studios, and I direct the story of the game, the world of the game we're making. And I do think a lot of what I'm going to show you today actually feeds into that. Talking about emotion, talking about sense of place, sense of humanity. And so I'm going to show you some of the stuff that I've worked on with that in my sketchbooks, and then talk about some of the touch points that it has in other parts of my life. So I can jump in, Jordan, or you could, if you wanted me to frame anything else, I'm happy to.
No, I think this is a great place to start.
Okay. So you're in my studio with me right now. It's very small. This is gonna be a little bit wild ride. I'll try to do this very gently. I keep this, I got a wall sort of works in progress and recent paintings behind me. I like hanging up paintings and living with them a little bit.
Yeah.
And kind of soaking them in before I call them done, and just letting them kind of breathe some. I'll try to do this very gently. It's a small studio space, but it's all that I need. That's my current big painting that I'm working on. I'm an oil painter mostly when it comes to work outside my sketchbooks, but I'm very much watercolor and gouache inside my sketchbooks. I'm going to stand. I'm always, whenever I end up talking, I want to stand. And there's a sunroom to my left, but I'm not going to keep whirling you folks around. The topic for today, though, is sketchbooks. And before I get to the presentation, I wanted to show you some physical objects. So this is my stack of completed sketchbooks. I've got one a year that I've done, with an additional there's one or two mixed in just from specific trips. My wife and I did a baby moon through Europe for a few weeks, and one of these is just that. And you're going to see some images of all these. This is my current one that I just started for this year. I tend to kind of average about one a year, and I try to bookend it with that. It's a nice kind of target. It's forgiving. If I have a few pages at the end that are done or that I'm finished, I don't pressure myself on that, but it keeps me sort of having this tracker of, this was a year of my life. This is what I did. This is who I was with. Important moments. Some other call outs. I've expanded this a little bit. So this is actually an ongoing love letter to my wife that is also a sketchbook journal that I've started doing over the last year. And I just fill it up with notes to her and little drawings from life. So in addition to my yearly sketchbook, she gets this as an ongoing present. These are two collaborative sketchbooks that I mail back and forth. This one's actually with Dad. This is with my friend Stasia, who's one of my favorite collaborators to work with. And these get this one especially gets wild. Dad and I just trade watercolors and letters back and forth in it. This one's just a mess of it just keeps it a little more free. It's not my style, but we just engage in different ways to kind of collaborate. I do this with my sons too. And both of those, there's gouache and watercolor stuff that happens with my kids. And I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. So it's chaos over here. But with that, I'm going to start showing you kind of who I am and kind of how this all fits together. And Jordan, you mentioned you want to keep this informal. I'm happy for folks to ask questions as we go. I'm happy to answer questions at the end. So just if I'm not paying attention to hands going up or anything, or just call out. So
yeah, I think we'll do probably questions at the end. And
okay, cool.
Yeah,
sounds good.
I may enter, but
yeah. And let me.
And I'll try to collate the questions if they come in through the chat.
Cool. Screen share. Can you folks see that?
Yep.
All right. I love what you call this as a kind of a life practice, Jordan, and I really think that's part of it. When we were living in California and the wildfires were coming through, I live in Maryland now again. But my wife and I were talking about, okay, what do we need to do if the wildfires come near our house? And they were getting pretty close at one point. We were fine, but this was a conversation. And we looked around and said, well, we need the kids. We need the stuff to keep kids alive. We've got a dog, an old great dog, and 2 cats. So let's make sure we take care of them. Like, what else do we need? And we said, well, actually, not really anything. Like, if all this went up in smoke, we'd be sad. There'd be things we would miss a lot. But we got the important stuff with that. But then my wife actually said, you need to grab your sketchbooks. She's like, I can live with anything, but those are important. Those are keepsakes for the family for years. And this is true of my father's work as well. So it is a practice of memory keeping for me. It archives the life of my family now in a lot of ways. So, but a bit of sort of who I am that led me to this. I say, a lot of my work is oil painting, landscape, very, very heavy in my life. I love sense of place. I love planes of color. I love trying to capture something of the temperature, the weather, the feeling of being in a location. And I think the sketchbooks help feed this in enormously big ways that I'll talk about as we go through things. In 2005, this is pretty formative for me, and I think you'll see this and kind of show up in my work still. My father and I got a joint grant to travel to Antarctica. And this was a father-son artist team, the first of its kind in the National Science Foundation's polar program for artists and writers. So they send artists and writers down to the ice every year, and they apply, they put in a grant submission, and they select a few. Ours was to travel around the area of McMurdo Station and out to the dry valleys and do painting, plein air, and then bring a lot of work back and do more of it as well. And this is some of the work that I did from that trip. This is extremely formative for me, just being that saturated experience of painting kind of nonstop in this very austere alien landscape. Absolutely beautiful. Changed, I think, my trajectory for how I approach work, how I approach sense of place. And again, it started to lean into kind of this planes of color, sort of some emotion conveyed through simplicity of the landscape. I'm a representational painter, I'm a classical painter, but I think in things a little bit abstractly, more than I think comes across in the work sometimes. In addition, I do a lot of figure painting and portraits, less so a little bit these days, but it shows up a lot in my sketchbook. So I wanted to mention it here, especially when I start documenting the life of my family more and more. They start showing up in the sketchbooks, and life drawings of my kids are prevalent throughout the sketchbooks. Which is that if you ever want to really do some serious gesture drawing practice, and I think one thing that's going to come a lot is not making things precious, just making it about the experience of making the sketchbook. Try to do life drawing of a 2-year-old and 4-year-old. It's a wild ride.
I was thinking about how you work and you post images of your family online, and here my kids are now 6 and 9, and I feel like, oh my God, I wasted so many years by not drawing them. But I remember that initial attempt to try to draw babies, and you think, oh, they're asleep, they're going to be still forever. And then they start moving, and then your drawing goes south, and then you're like, I'm going to butcher this drawing, and I'm just not going to do it. I remember that fear, and I was so impressed with your sticking through that experience of drawing your children.
I appreciate that, but I think that's key in terms of like, it is practice. You got to treat it like it. These are very important to me, but I can't be precious about them, or else the whole thing falls apart in the process of making them. Now, the process of having them and passing them down to my kids in the future, that's important to me. But it's all about like just scattershot. Just try lots of stuff, let it go. It's not about the individual drawing; it's about the experience of making it, and out of that will lift things you don't expect. You just can't try to find value in the moment. I think it locks you into expectation, which can be dangerous. But if you just make it part of the process, and then over time let things lift to the surface. That's why I talk about hang out paintings of letting them live a little bit, even ones I don't love. I think you'll find you're surprised by sort of the gems and the product that you didn't expect in the moment. It's hard. It's really hard. I mean, I'm not saying I'm good at it either. Like, it's just, I'm saying what I try to do as much as possible.
Oh, I'm saying you're good at it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, and so this was a quick detour that does speak to like a lot of the observational work that I do and resonates in the sketchbook stuff. I was briefly a host and illustrator for a PBS series called Time Team America, where it was about drawing life as it would have been and working with a team of archaeologists to convey what an archaeological site was like at the time, helping educate viewers on how that site functioned with people that lived there. And this was actually, I think, a cool way to look at sort of art as educational, art as memory keeping, and conveying history. I think that wove into a lot of what I'm going to talk about today too. Real fast, I might return to this at the end real fast, but I have a kit that I carry around. This is what keeps this practical for me. I keep it very light. I have a bag pretty much always ready to go that has my stuff in it, or my stuff is near it. It's just a $30 bag off some website. It's nothing fancy for art. But it fits my folding stool on the top. It has extra pockets for stuff, magnetic buckles that are quick for taking things apart. I use Moleskin watercolor sketchbooks just because I like the landscape format of them for what I do. They got really nice paper quality without being too light or too heavy. And then just a regular pencil case. You can find these. I'll share links with Marianne and Jordan. There's a link on this online. You can find it if you want to see it. I use that. Dad actually recommended these to you. These are the Skoda watercolor brushes. They're quite nice because they come in a kind of canister, and they can actually flip around. You open them and flip around, and you've got a brush, and then you can put them back away easily, so they stay together quite nicely. I've since sort of started carrying around a little painter box with more square brushes because I'm enjoying that quality. But again, it's just options for everyone that finds their style with it. I don't think I have one in here, unfortunately. I think I must have taken it to the sink to wash it. But there's a kind of Winsor & Newton collapsible water bowl that has a kind of wavy lip you can put a brush on. So it's real small and fits very nicely into a bag. Watercolor palette, plastic one, like most people have, but it works great for me. My folding stool, I tend to carry around with me. I replaced my hat with this one that Jordan mentioned because I sit in a stool now. It's better for keeping yourself warm on cold days and not soaking in the cold from the ground. That was the idea of the hat in many cases. Bulldog clips. This is one that I think actually is probably the only unique thing here that tends to surprise people, but is fantastic. What's nice about it is that you can have your sketchbook open, and often they have this kind of like, that the elastic to grab it and hold one page open, but then you can do a bulldog clip on the other. I carry about 3 or 4. Sometimes I clip my palette to one page and keep my hands very free if I have to stand somewhere. They're just versatile, and then I usually have one locking the palette closed, and I store it that way. Locking the sketchbook closed, excuse me. Yeah, and then headphones and that kind of stuff, paper towels. So this keeps it simple for me. And I've started to introduce gouache to this since I did this illustration, but I can basically fit all in one bag, combine it with other stuff I'm traveling, and keep it light. And that way it's not a big ordeal to put my kit together and carry it around with me. So yeah, starting to get into some of the pages. I'm not going to talk about each of these individually. I'm kind of going to talk about process and sort of, excuse me, I'm going to fix my microphone for a moment. I'm just kind of scroll through these and kind of talk about the journey overall of them. But this was when I actually started. This was actually in Patagonia. It was one trip my wife and I made together, and we before our kids, we tended to take sketchbook trips. Like they were all about like being in the place, but not going to too many spots, picking a few and spending a little more time in them, sitting in cafes or on hillsides and painting. And that was a lot of what our vacations were. So this is in Patagonia, and in El Capitan is one of the places, the Via Glacier. And this is also when we moved to Quebec. We were living in Montreal for a while and started trying to capture the feeling of living there, which is a fantastic city. It's very dear to my heart. That's what you see here at the bottom. It's some visits to Quebec City as well. And I just tried to capture any trips we were making, any journeys. So like, we saw some friends in San Francisco. Okay, so let's paint in San Francisco for an afternoon. And anywhere I went, I tried to just get at least one page in. Again, you want to make, in my experience, you don't want to make yourself be highly pressured by this, or else it won't be fun anymore. But I do try to do something just to hold onto a memory. And generally speaking, I tried to be plein air about it. That has since changed, and I'll talk about that as we go through things. I think that's okay too. Like I said, it's about the creation. Like plein air I prefer across the board because I think it's more lively. I think it's more real in terms of sort of the connection to the place in that moment. But it's not the only way to work in my view.
Can you talk briefly about just how these are created as a technical way, like with
a
line or?
Yeah. So I start with a light pencil and just kind of sketch stuff in. In some cases, I try to really focus on that. You can see I don't do a ton of architecture and like or vehicles or that kind of thing, because I think they require a little bit more drawing attention in my style than I can maintain in a few minutes of sitting down and just capturing something. Mm-hmm. But exactly like this porch is a good example. Like get an idea, find the bits that really resonate, like the structure of the light hitting the siding here shows some structure in the piece and conveys that. But I don't go overboard with it for my specific style. Then the watercolor or gouache painting. What I often do here, and you can see here, is I bring back in a micron pen at the end. Not always. Sometimes I think it lives fine without it, and I prefer it. But the micron pen is, if I'm working very fast, very light and loose, it can be a way to sort of re-corral some of the detail and structure there at the end. And I think that's a useful tool to kind of throw in your kit and carry around with you as an option. You can see like even here, like I didn't do it in every part of this. My wife is cuddling with her dog, but then her mom's dog is sleeping next to her, and I didn't even do it on that one. So it's all fluid in my view. This is the baby moon I was talking about. So we were in Split, Croatia, Dubrovnik, Kotor, Bosnia, and then I ended up in Paris. And sometimes I don't like fill these in completely. Like you can see in this bottom middle, I just kind of got the sense of it. It's okay, I'll move on to the next thing. We're traveling, I'm holding up because Jess is done and she wants to go somewhere else. My wife is a great artist as well. She's fantastic to have as an artist partner. She's also a fantastic model. She's in a lot of these. We'll see as we get into people. But as Jordan said, this is practice. It's in addition to having the keepsake, it's also a way to just stay in the habit. The writing also, the best advice I heard for getting to be a better writer is to keep a journal and write all the time about whatever it was in your day. You'll tune the skills and learn your style and your voice with it by doing. And I think you find it in that nature a little more organically. And for me, like I've realized I'm not great at memory. I'm not great at observation. If I'm walking by something, I may not realize the beauty of it. But if I sit down and paint, I connect with it in a much more real way. I'm actually not very observational. I think people look at this like, oh, you have such great observational skills. Like, well, maybe if I'm painting, but if I'm just walking around, I'm not really at all. And so this is a good way for me to connect more deeply with a place when I'm visiting it. So you should, different times a day. I love, my senior thesis was actually painting down at Fells Point from about late afternoon into dark here in Baltimore. And just doing about 10 oil painting studies in that stretch, all small, is capturing moments of time as it went by, what changes over 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, as the light moves from late to sunset into dusk into nighttime. And it's great. And I would come home with 10 to 12 paintings, varying degrees of success and failure. But the experience of doing that, I think, taught me to kind of capture things in the moment and not be precious about it. So I'm going a little bit fast because I kind of give you a spread of these. You can find most of these on my website as well. They're up there, so you're happy to feel free to look through that. I'll post some links for folks or provide them to Mariana and Jordan.
Can I ask you, Colin, how much of the gouache, if any, do you use, or do you just add white and have it there?
That's a great question. This is all watercolor. I introduced gouache in the last couple of years, and I think I'll make sure to call that out when I get into that practice. So this is all watercolor, just leaving the white of the paper. I find that when I leverage the white of the paper more and keep things simple, for me, it works nicer. But that, again, everyone finds their style with this. I tend to be fast and say, okay, did I hit it in the first kind of feeling of it? And then try to move on, at least in the sketchbooks.
Can I ask a quick question about text in relationship to the imagery?
Please, yeah.
So it's more of like a chicken or the egg thing. Like, do you, as you're working with creating the image, and I imagine the image comes first and then the text follows, but are you thinking about what you want to write as you're working, or is it almost later back at the hotel, I'm trying to write down some stuff?
That's a good question. Yeah, a great point of process. I'm not writing it because I want to keep moving and capturing where I am. So I might take some notes in pencil or something, or in my phone, just remember what we were thinking. But for the most part, I tend to just try to capture the visuals, and that evening, often we'll sit down and say, okay, what happened today? Or even later, like sometimes I return to stuff like 4 or 5 days later. It's like, well, what was that day? And try to get in even the memory of it. But there's not a one-to-one correlation a lot of times. In this case, in the middle, we're at a friend's art press in Paris. And so I talked specifically about that and the history of that location. Above that, the Musée d'Orsay, I wrote specifically about the experience of being there. Fantastic museum. So there are some correlations, and a lot of times it's just like, hey, this is a painting of a bar, but now I'm talking about the long walk that Jess and I took that day, or that kind of thing.
If I could throw one thing out that works for me sometimes when you're in a rush like that, it's just if you're going to come back and do this in micron, particularly our pencil, doesn't matter. Just throw down a couple of little bullets or just 1 or 2 words that remind you what was really powerful about that experience. It's kind of a working note to come back to.
Yeah, I agree.
Like the bee landed on my shoulder as I was painting, something like that. You know.
So this is, getting into, actually, we're at this point, I'm tracking different little life events. So the middle is actually our apartment in Montreal that we lived in for 4 years. And right before we boxed everything up to move to our house that we bought, still in Montreal at that point. And again, it's funny, that's just my living room. So a lot of times it's not travel. A lot of times it's like, this is an important thing I want to recall and lock in somewhere. And every time I open the sketchbook and find that page, I remember the layout of that. I remember that window opening to the tree outside and the street and people walking by. So it brings up things that might slip from more constant memory over time. It's Quebec City. This is a cabin we rented in Quebec. And now I get a trip to Miami. So now this is a beach trip. This is just like, I'm just going to the beach. This isn't our trip, but I'm sitting on a beach chair. I'm going to pull up my sketchbook from that bag and play a little bit. And even then, like, this is just a football towel on a chair, but it's a moment. So sometimes it's big landscape. Sometimes it's little tiny, little intimate things, objects or still lifes. I've done this at Disney World when when we've done family trips. Like, it's just, I try to take advantage of almost anything. This is actually done alongside Dad in Quebec when he came to visit. So now we're getting into some life changes stuff as well, where here we go, big one. We had our first child. So this is Atticus, who's now just turning 4 this month. And I took my sketchbook to the hospital. I didn't know what I was going to be able to do, but and this is where you really want to let go of trying to make things precious. But while my wife was nursing, I painted a few things of her hands holding her son, her sitting in the chair. And I don't think these technically work out as well as other pieces I've done, but wow, do I value these, and just the act of doing them. Those first few days, and just had like this, I was exhausted, I was sleep deprived. I was also prioritizing helping, but you see, like, all these moments are when my son is sleeping or my wife is nursing him. And that's the moment that I can maybe do something for 5-10 minutes. And this is where I started to blur into, okay, I want to capture this moment. I couldn't do it from life because I needed to help or take care of things or sleep myself. But so I started working photographs. That has a different feeling to it as a process, but I'm glad I've done that, because it means I still am doing the work, but I'm getting to prioritize the time with my family. And paint when my kids are asleep instead of costing time with them. There's some blur there. Sometimes my kids are playing and I can just paint or draw them while they're working or do other stuff. But this is my kind of priority list at this point in my life. So you see, like, just, okay, here's some drawings of my son when he had to go back for jaundice, and so, like, he's in the incubator, and just this jumble of legs and fingers and stuff just was beautiful to me while I was sitting next to him waiting for him to get through that process with jaundice while he's in the incubator. Just something to do and keep him company. Beautiful. My words also are very sleep deprived here, but you take what you can. So how are we doing on time? I think we're probably chewing through, right? Mm-hmm. How much time do I have left? I have a clock in front of me.
You're good.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah, and then I still found some times for some other stuff. Like, we're going on family trips again with our little one. Grandparents can help them. I will say, though, the bottom right is in Lake Placid. And I remember this one is that my son got up before anyone else. I had him in a boa wrap on my chest, and I went outside and he fell back asleep on me, and actually brought my bag out, and that painting was done when my son is asleep on my chest. And that became just you squeezing what you can, even as a parent with a little child. The far left is Georgia, where I'm from, and where Dad lives now. Those are some just like small little snapshot landscapes from a trip, a quick turnaround trip I had to do there one time. And I started to weave in people more and more. This is a very, very dear friend of mine in the middle that I just had coffee with Jess when she met our son, and just grabbed a quick sketch of her while we were hanging out just to remember it.
Oh, they're just gorgeous.
What's that? Sorry?
They're just gorgeous. I'm admiring.
Sometimes I pull in recipes as well. You can see in the middle, like this is my cornbread recipe that I use all the time now. My kids love. So, like, just while I might do a little sketch of carrots in between cooking. So you get the kids really took over the sketchbooks, and I don't mind that. I think I still squeeze in other stuff. That's my wife Jess in the top left again. Third, the dog in the third panel there. That's when one of our dogs passed away. So a lot of very emotional things were wrapped into this, and that's when he was waiting for the vet techs to come by and do euthanasia on in our home. Trips to Hawaii with the family. At this point, we've also this is moving to I have the last one. Yeah, far right and bottom left as well. We've moved to California at this point. We've taken jobs in Los Angeles. This is about 2019. And so big life changes are getting wrapped up into this now. trip to see the Endeavor at the Los Angeles Science Museum. So I make deals with my wife where we like, okay, give me 20 minutes. Let me do a painting of this while you walk around with our son. And then I want to be really present the rest of that time. So I try to partition out the time and be really careful about it and make sure I'm engaging as a father and a husband as the priority.
I love those ink wash drawings in the middle. They make me think of Rembrandt with his bamboo pen drawings.
And I love ink wash as a life drawing medium. I don't always have it handy. It's a little bit more it's a dangerous thing to have around kids, but I find it really loose and gestural and fun to play with. I love life drawing animals. So this is a trip to the zoo. And again, these had to be really fast and quick. But in fact, I think I even did the watercolor after. I think I sketched them in there. And this might be a tool to consider for yourselves as well, with pencil, because I could do that kind of walking around my son and my wife. And then I came back home and did the watercolor afterwards. And it's very simple. It's like, well, I know I want to convey the green of the alligator, but he had a lot of sun on him. Use the white of the paper. I got a little structure. That's all I need. Flamingos are great to paint. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And then we're on to child number 2. So things are getting even more busy. This is Griffin. He just turned 2 January 1st. Excuse me, I'm sorry. And Atticus is really running around and being a gremlin in this window too. And trying to capture little stuff. The far right is it's not always big, meaningful life events. The far right is me trying to remember, okay, what are all the different fun things that my son does when I say, what does an alligator say? Or what does a shark say? And the shark is like, da, 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 and what does a jellyfish say? And it's blah, 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 blah. So those are things that I just want to want to remember that I'm having these conversations with my son, putting them in. And again, here, I'm really painting on photographs more because I'm chasing, at that point, a 2-year-old while I have a new infant as well. So when I have a few moments of quiet at the end of the day, I'll pull up a photograph I snapped and say, okay, I want to capture this moment here.
And the taking a photograph, and do you think something shifts? Like, I don't know, what do you improve upon in the photograph? Would you say?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think this is one of the values of the sketchbook in a big way. In fact, you folks saw this big forest painting here on the right that I'm working on. Again, because I'm not able to go sit on location with a big canvas and that ordeal while I've got 2 little boys that I want to prioritize time with. I can't do that except for my studio from photograph. This is a commission from someone that wants this kind of work. And so it's actually from a photograph I have, but also I did a sketch in my sketchbook. And the nice thing about that is the sketchbook becomes a template of, well, you kept it loose here. These are the details you found mattered. And then you moved on. And I found that actually I'm course correcting this to be less detailed now because I got lost in it. And it's too much. I lost the spirit of it. So in a lot of ways, even if I work in photograph in the sketchbook, that lightness of touch becomes a tool for me to look at the bigger pieces as well. And if I can do a fast watercolor on site, it becomes a great template for, okay, this is what I felt like in the moment. Let's convey that as much as we can over there. But you can, and this is why I think even if you work from photograph, you want to supplement that with as much life plein air work as you can, because it'll keep you remembering the immediacy of the moment, even if it's a photograph you took that you never got to do a watercolor of. If you're doing lots of plein air watercoloring, it'll keep you loose, I feel. Same thing with life drawing. It's real fast to get locked in and tight when you're painting people from photographs. But if your muscle memory is all about, well, I'm doing this fast because my kids are running around nonstop, that conveys itself through the process of working from the photograph a little bit as well.
That's excellent advice.
There's a cranberry tart recipe in the middle. Wonderful. It's in a tradition for us now on Christmases. And now we're moving back to Maryland. So Southern California is great. All love to people that love Southern California. It wasn't for us long term. So we bounced out and moved back east during the pandemic. So this is also starting to get interesting because now I'm not going out and doing trips even with our son anymore. We're kind of locked in. There's a lot of folks have been for the last couple of years. We're squeaking out here and there, but for the most part, it's been okay. What is this new reality of now living back on the East Coast without moving back to see a lot of friends and family, and largely we're kind of by ourselves. living in our home in Freeland, Maryland. So it became sort of, well, now I'm going to meditate a lot of these sketchbook pages on being in my living room or property with my kids. What's the sunset like out my front door? There's a beautiful, cornfield down the street. Let me take a photograph of that and paint from that, and immerse myself in the feeling of my immediate home and landscape a lot more deeply. That's why I want to show the Antarctica work early, because I think actually I'm finding resonance with the Antarctica work that I've not found in years. These plains of farmland and rural Maryland resonate with those plains of color in Antarctica. It's almost Rothko-esque. As much as I'm a representative painter, he's one of my favorite artists, because I find such emotion in this, the resonance of one color kind of laid next to another, and what it means for sort of like, you read it as sort of this emotional place, even though it's just rectangles on a canvas. You'll see more come out, like I do more like there's sunsets and skies in here, but even the top right, like that's mostly two planes of color and an undulating silhouette that has silos in a barn. That's it. Actually, that right there, that's the old painting that came out of that top right one. And there's probably actually, you know what? And bottom is, I'm going to bring this one over. There's two of these. I'm working up to a larger painting of this, but this is that one. If you can see both at the same time, the bottom. And things change from like that. Now I'm getting into gouache as well, Mariana. So you can see like there's a little more opacity mixing in. I still try to leverage the paper. I mix watercolor and gouache a lot when I work. Occasionally I go full gouache, but even then I tend to keep a little light. I can talk about gouache for a long time because it's been a really engaging, different medium to pull in. I won't go too deep on it because I think it's worth a whole conversation by itself, and but it's a fascinating medium because it's almost a mix of watercolor and like acrylic, and it has such a beautiful matte quality. I adore it, especially for grays. I love its oystery grays quality, and oystery grays is a term I use a lot for my work. I tend to do that, and then punches of color, like in this bottom one.
Would you mind talking briefly about, I guess, the process of taking something that you're working on in your sketchbook, on site, for instance, and bringing that back to the studio to do something a little bit, either an oil or substantial or more time labored?
Yeah.
And how to keep that life to.
Yeah, and I think that's great. Actually, the bottom one, even though this looks a little different than the oil painting, I ended up dropping the photographic reference for this to make my oil painting and just use the sketchbook reference. And that means I'm deviating from the photograph, but I'm capturing something more of the immediacy of the sketchbook feeling that I got, and not trying to make it look like the detailed photograph. That's been a really useful tool for me because my work falls apart when I get too detailed. As you've seen here, I tend to be about sort of the immediacy of it. That's not true for a lot of, there's some detailed high realism painters that can capture such emotion through that detail. I'm not one of them. So that's not a judgment. That's just a personal thing about my take on things. But yeah, so I found using this gouache sketch in the bottom as the vehicle for that painting. I did that I changed course about halfway through, and all of a sudden the painting started clicking again, because I started caring about what mattered to me in that moment of doing the sketch, as opposed to looking at a photograph and trying to make everything matter. And I'll probably do the same thing. Like I have that oil painting sketch. When I go to the big piece of that one, I'll probably just pull up the oil painting and use that as the inspiration.
Wonderful.
And you can, and I'm thinking about this as I work through it. I think you can go back and forth too. Sometimes it's good to say, okay, I've done that for a little bit. Now let's pull the photograph. What does that speak to me now? And that way you're not just making a carbon copy. You're kind of letting the subject matter guide you from different angles.
Right.
That's my old dog, Hugo, up top, 14-year-old hound dog. Recommend Black and Tan Coon hounds. They're great dogs.
Wow.
He's fantastic. And he gets mixed in with now I'm just life drawings of my kids overlapping with life drawings of him. It's just a jumble. I let that stuff go sometimes. Yeah. This is one of my favorite spreads. This is nearing the end of the 2021 sketchbook. And my kids love trains, so we go to see Train Museum. But now, I really wanted to close out that sketchbook with the bottom is near the last few pages was my wife's grandmother, who's still with us, but she's getting quite old. I'm sure I got something with her while she was sleeping. I was staying with her one time, and then my wife Jess. And this is the day that we actually took to ourselves and went out and down in Baltimore City while the kids were at daycare. Don't get a lot of that these days. Then the last 2 pages of the sketchbook are Griffin and Atticus, and just profiles of them together. And I still get emotional looking at these 2 paintings because they landed how I wanted to, and they rounded out that year of sketchbook and the year we'd had together of living in relative quarantine really well. A note on that last one. I'll try to find it. I can't. Yeah, perfect. I started painting this and realized that the composition wasn't working. I needed more of that reflective street, but I'd framed the drawing wrong. This is another day of like not keeping it precious. I taped another piece of paper in and added to the painting. And I'll probably want to turn this into a larger painting at some point, but that was just a way of saying, well, again, just don't keep it too precious. Stuff comes out that becomes precious, but if you don't want to force the precious. This trip to Maine, this is great. This is actually one Dad and I have not gotten to paint together in a long time. But we took a trip to Maine, out Great Sprucehead Island, where we have some close friends, and spent a week. And actually, even though we had gremlins, we were there at that time, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. We were able to squeeze in some windows of painting here and there.
Can I interrupt you? I've been to
Please.
Great Sprucehead Island. I'm a friend of the Porter family. Are you?
Wow, that's great. I'd love to catch up with you about that after this.
Yeah, okay, that's great.
Yeah, it's such an amazing place. Like everything that Maine is just fantastic. The light quality and like just the atmosphere. I can't get enough of it. So we're closing in sort of where I am now. And most recent stuff. And briefly speak about some other stuff that I do here. So again, I think all this kind of writing and storytelling and memories and landscape and sense of world and place feeds into me creating video game worlds and the work that I do to drive a team towards that vision. In addition, I keep a webcomic. And this is it's called Circus Cidade. Cidade is a Portuguese word that we don't have a direct translation for. It means in short, it means the feeling of wanting something and loving it and missing it and knowing you may never have it again, but that being maybe okay. It's also a word used to just say goodbye to someone you love, even though if you might see them again. But it's about missing them even when they're not around, and that emotional place. It's a very subtle, complex word. I love its layers, and the circus is named after it. But I've been telling this story for about 10 years. I think a sketchbook feeds into this in a lot of ways. You'll see some similar kind of landscape feeling. I've taught myself to I'm not a comic book artist. I don't do like intricate line work. And the more I've embraced that I'm a painter in the comic work, the better I think it's been more lately. I've kept it loose. You can see in here, like there's a lot of painting going on in the clothes and just very simple outlines. I'm not doing a lot of like intricate comic inking. And it's all in black and white actually, which is different for me compared to the color I use in a lot of my work. The covers I do in color, but the comic itself is in black and white. But again, I'm trying to tell a sense of place inside this circus, try to get into these portraits that I love so much of these characters. I spend a lot of time in just drawing like frames of looking at someone's face because it's so much fun. And again, it's like getting back into storytelling and writing and the practice that I've done with that in the sketchbooks, I think lends into this quite well. And also just a practice. And the sketchbook is a great way to stay in the habit of drawing people, drawing places, as Jordan started with. That's my presentation. I think we have a little bit of time for questions as well. Yeah, it was good. That actually turned out pretty well time-wise. So
Yeah, nice job.
I'm going to stop sharing. I can bring up stuff again if people want, but yeah.
Ian, if you want to start with the question, that'd be great.
Sure. It seems like the theme of keeping things loose and not being too precious is a recurring theme in your work. Is that something that you came to as an approach just from self-reflection or from something that someone said or a combination of the two? How did you come to that approach?
Yeah, I think I give Dad a little credit on this because I think he didn't, pinpoint me in one direction, let me find my way. Jordan and I had a teacher that he mentioned the name of Mark Carnes in college too. I think Mark is actually where a lot of this clicked for me. We had a 6-credit 10-hour long class with him every Thursday, Jordan?
I don't think it was 10 hours, but it was at least 6.
Yeah. Well, I think it was 9 because it was 9 to 4.
9
It was
credits.
long.
It was
It was God paint. And Mark Carnes is one of those high realism painters I was talking about. Like, he'll spend weeks on a single painting about this big. And I give him such credit because he looked at my work. He's like, that's not you. He's like, you're about painting 10 to 12 paintings a night. He's like, and he told me, he's like, if you're gonna do that, keep your brushes clean. Bring a lot of brushes. He's like, don't try to do it. Like, he's like, you're getting a little muddy. Like, so he gave me good craft advice towards my goals, but he quickly recognized this is the artist you are, and directed me down that path. I think this is the tenet of a great teacher. He didn't direct me towards his approaches. He kind of found, he saw a glimmer of what my soul was, and really gave me freedom to embrace that. So some of it was sort of following my feelings on things. A lot of it's been necessity even more too now. Like, I think one of the great things about sketchbooks is give me a way to do more work out in the world than carrying around a big oil painting kit like I did. Even the oil painting is just a lot to do on site, especially for travel. You can't really do it. So I think it's been necessity as well. And with the kids, like, I know it's been a theme I talk about a lot, but that's just been, I only got a few slivers of time, or I've got to kind of do something fast and let it go and see what happens with it.
And just for an anchor for a lot of you guys, Mark Carnes, who taught at Maryland Institute College of Art, was the mentor for Glenn Kessler, who teaches at the Atelier up in Rockville, who's once upon a time a Yellow Barn instructor, and also Ilya Gefter, who visited the Yellow Barn. That was before I left for Japan, but was a protege of Mark Carnes, especially in the ink washes. So
Yeah.
if you guys can remember their work, there's a common thread through Colin and those artists as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Colin, I'd just like to throw out, in addition to the work we've done together on site, like in Maine or in Antarctica, which was insane. I think we did something like 150 paintings in 10 weeks.
Yeah.
But one of our favorite haunts to me has always been, I always say there's 3 places I love to go draw with you. And one of them is zoos, natural history museums for all the bones and the dinosaur fossils and all that stuff. And then a real challenge, aquariums.
Yeah.
Try drawing an octopus sometime. It's moving. It'll keep you loose.
Well, Mr. Campbell, if I can ask a question, as a father, did you give Colin any recommendations or advice when his kids were born about how to be an artist around children, or is there something that you kind of passed on to Colin that made him such an incredible father and artist at the same time?
I'm too busy learning from him. No, not really. I mean, good Lord, getting out of his way and just keeping supplies available. I think he said one time, if I tried to talk him into being an artist, he probably would have gone to law school or done something different, which I'm glad he didn't do that. No, children are, I think Picasso said it, said children are born artists. They really are. I mean, and we teach it at them if we're not careful. But after I saw Colin doing those charcoal drawings of dinosaurs and elephants on the floor of my studio in Athens, and was smart enough to take photographs of it. He had asked me I was on the phone and he'd asked me for something to draw on, and could he draw? And I gave him some charcoal and said, go find something to draw on. And he literally did. He couldn't find any paper. So he just took all, and that kind of creativity, you just want to get out of the way. No, the kids will do it. I mean, you give them the materials and they'll just rip in there, is my experience.
Was there a specific point that you remembered where you knew that Colin was destined to go down that path as an artist and, maybe not be that lawyer? Was there an aha moment?
I'll tell you one. My major professor at the University of Georgia was a man named Lamar Dodd, who trained at the Art Students League back in the 1920s. And one of his big experiences that I envied and sort of influenced eventually going to the Antarctic with the National Science Foundation was he was there were about 50 artists that included Robert Rauschenberg, Jamie Wyeth, The rest of them were national caliber names who were on contract to NASA to document the race to the moon. And they got to go down to Cape Kennedy for all the launches and climb into capsules, meet the astronauts, do all this super cool stuff. And the best of those paintings are out there in Space Museum now. And what was your question? Because I was going to tie it back to that.
Oh, it was just is there a moment?
No, I took some, growing up, my father had always taken me over to see this, iconic teacher, head of the department growing up. And I was, after I graduated and Colin was born, and he was like at the stage where he was doing those things on the floor in the studio, just churning stuff out of his head. I took some of them by and showed them to my old mentor, and he looked at them and he had a real sly sense of humor, but there was truth to it too. He said, these are great. He says, you realize he's better than you. But then he followed it. He let it sink in and watched my expression. And then he came back. He said, but he may be better than me too. No, I think I've been making some notes as Colin's been talking, and just the importance. I think we were in Antarctica. This is Colin. This is our member. You said I taught you the importance of more sustained involvement with the subject. You got me loosened up more about being more emotional and painting from the subject. Bang, in and out, and there is something to get lost from that immediacy of the experience when you start trying to use your phrase, make it too precious, make it too. And I've always said, when something's finished, when the painting, people say, when's the painting finished? It's like saying, ask Whit Marsalis, when is the jazz finished? There is no end point. I like to say it's finished when the painting stops talking to you.
It's wonderful.
Like that.
So
Can I ask a question of both of you? How did you think to apply for a grant to go to Antarctica? That's so cool. I mean, this has been fantastic, but I'm curious about how that partnership is amazing to me.
Dad is over with us. I'll let him speak to it. He's been a few times.
That's a question with about an hour-long answer, unfortunately. A long story short, my master's thesis was on the use of color to create light and luminosity in painting, studying the origins of the French Impressionists, who happen to be rooted in science. Chevreul's book,
right,
which is now available as an art book, The Laws of Simultaneous Contrasts and Something in Color. A lot of other exposure to science coming along in college, working one summer at Staple Island Marine Institute for the University of Georgia, seeing the parallels when graduate school course and the parallels between creativity and art and science that are just like boom. And seeing photographs of incredible abstract landscapes with all this light on the ice, and figuring out a way to get an introduction to the National Science Foundation. Colin and my trip was the fourth and probably my final. But it's a very little known but active program at the National Science Foundation that I take a lot of satisfaction in helping present the idea when there was a lot of skepticism. And it's really highly valued, very much looked upon in favor. Not to get too political, but the last presidential name not to be mentioned, some of his people tried to get it canceled. Why are we spending money sending artists to Antarctica? And the National Science Foundation made a brilliant move. They did a bureaucratic sleight of hand and put it under review, which basically put it in the closet for 3 years until things changed. How it goes forward, but it basically was a trade-off on how art can be used to help promote awareness of the big science stories. And one last comment on that, I don't want to monopolize this, one last comment on that was right before I went, the little synchronicities that can happen when you follow your heart. And I'm sure everybody in here, in the room here can tell their own story. But of all the exhibits to see before my first trip in 1987, I wandered into, they had an orientation session in Washington, and I wandered into the Museum of Natural History with my time off, right there on the mall. And of all the exhibits that they could have had, it was the 150th anniversary of the great exploring expedition that circumnavigated the world. And they had 2 artists on board. One of the Wyeths of the colonial period, the Peel family, I think it was Titian Peel, was on board. And it was like this big aha. So, but it's a collaboration, and it's that dialogue between art and science has gotten a whole lot more into the mainstream. in the time since.
I saw Vivian had her hand up earlier. I want to make sure you had a chance to ask the question you were going to ask.
Yes, hi. If I can ask you a question, Colin, your presentation is very impressive. I don't want to say
Thank you.
too much good words about it and memorable, but I can tell it's done by a professional artist.
Thank you very much.
I want to ask you to give us some suggestions, like beginners. Okay, how do you see the relationship between sketching and the serious artwork? I mean, how much, like, do you start with sketches because they're fast and loose and less details, whatever, and develop into serious paintings later, or you have to lay enough good solid foundations before you can start doing your own sketches, and and how much time and or can they proceed together? Because I love sketches. I think that is probably my my goal, and because at my age I don't see me become a very serious big word artist, but sketches is something I like to do in life. What is your suggestion?
Well, I think you're asking really great questions, but I think also I'd say that that I don't think anything's too late. I think the art's one of those weird industries where things can happen very, very, very surprisingly. I encourage everyone to. I think this kind of travel sketching can be for anybody, regardless of their aspirations for art or not. And I think to your point, like one thing that's probably good to keep in mind is that if you're talking about it purely as a business, there's clients that are going to want the big finished oil painting, that might be considered for them the more serious painting. There's going to be clients that love the immediacy of a sketch. There's whole exhibits that are just about sketches on works on paper, and that becomes the the iconic look of a lot of very successful artists. So I think it's that can ebb and flow. And I think and then on the personal side, I recommend that if you can think of it in terms of what resonates with you and what drives you to continue to create, I think that's where you find surprises, and that's where things come out of it more and more. That I don't think you need to. I think it's. I would encourage everyone to not try to box themselves into, I've got to make a big painting and that's the goal. The more you work, the more you'll find the thing that speaks to you and makes your work special, either for yourself and for clients. But I think there's a correlation there. I think if folks get locked in sometimes to just doing work that they think will sell, and that may not be the best way to actually create works that sells, because it starts to feel like work that will sell, and as opposed to work that speaks to you. And I think that emotional connection to it comes out in the piece more than making something that you think is the serious work. So for me, I don't view the big old paintings as the end goal. They're one of the avenues that I'm taking to engage with the world. But for me, like I said, like when we're looking at the paintings on the wall, we're like, yeah, those can stay in the fire. But let's grab the box that has the sketchbooks in it. And just from my career, I think these have actually been a bigger driver. Even though I don't sell these, they draw attention to my work. People connect with them in ways that I think is a little bit more of a conversation than the finished oil paintings.
Thank you.
Okay. Good question. Thank you.
Anyone else have any final questions for Mr. Campbell?
Can I ask one?
Please.
It follows similarly what you brought up before about process. How do you did it? It's so wonderful to see the emotion and the sense of place and feeling in the small sketches. How do you capture, if you did say someplace drew you, whether it was Antarctica or Patagonia or wherever, or your children are playing on lawn, and you want to capture that in a larger form, but you want to capture the immediacy, how do you take that was a memory and immediate, but it was a beautiful, something you really wanted to portray? How do you do it in a larger scale and still keep it connected that way?
That's a great question. And I actually don't have a perfect answer to that, because I think it comes through feel. The best thing I'd say is that's the great aspect of the sketches, because you can do so many so fast and they become the muscle memory. So much of this is about like just training your body and your mind and your eye. And that happens over time and ebbs and flows and changes. But I find the more that I'm doing that, If I just did the big paintings not nonstop, I think I would lose it. And I would never be able to capture some of that immediacy of the bigger paintings. So that's why I lean so heavily into the sketch process. Is actually the driver of everything I do. And it reminds me of how to work. Even if I can't do things intentionally, a lot of it isn't. Some like I can break it down and say, okay, this is the right way to attack this problem. But even in that, there's unknowns and things that happen just by instinct. And I want to keep those instincts fed with the sketch process as much as possible.
Colin, that's excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. This is so much fun. I really appreciate
My
it.
one question
Thank
is,
you.
can you come back?
Yes,
I'd love to. Yes, please. This is a great chance.
very
for me to talk forward.
enriching.
Yeah.
Both
Thank you so
of
much.
you,
you.
can you come back?
Yes,
We
absolutely.
haven't gotten enough of you.
Thank
Both.
you. Anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
This is
everyone.
superb.
Thank you. I know a couple of people pinged me. I'm trying to. I wasn't able to keep up with the direct message while talking. Jordan and Mariana, are you able to share my website and contact information
Yes,
with the folks here?
Absolutely.
And
And I
folks,
will-
just reach out if there was something that you wanted to ask directly or get another look at. I'm more than happy to
Thank
keep
you.
conversations going. So yeah.
We usually send a little summary and links, important links. So I will do that and CC you as well. And
Thank you
and
so much. I really
Campbell
appreciate it.
As well,
Yeah.
and Alan
Okay.
as well,
Thank
if he
you.
wants. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.